I'm so glad it's the last one.
You guys are on.
Oh, good. Good evening, Santa Fe. We're here with the team Midtown Santa Fe, the selected master development team for the future of the Midtown district. Just a quick recap. We've been working with them since the very beginning, the first week of May. And they've since then really energized their team to begin thinking about some preliminary ideas for the redevelopment of the site. But most of that has really just been looking at the site and trying to understand what possibilities might be there based on previous public input, which was documented in the Midtown planning guidelines that everyone has access to on the public website. Many of you have already seen. And they've been moving forward and collaborating with different city departments, as well as meeting with elected officials, visiting the site, walking the site, understanding the buildings, the history, the memory that's there, and everything that people want to see preserved and then brought forward in the development plan. Again, they have not created a development plan. They proposed a series of ideas in their proposal when they submitted way back in the fall. And then we evaluated their submission packages and finally came to a unanimous decision by an 11-member evaluation committee to select the Midtown team, Team Midtown, to begin the process of creating a development plan with the city and with the public. So these meetings that we've been having these past few Tuesdays, every other Tuesday since they were selected, have been called Meet the Developer. So meaning that it is just an introduction. We're meeting them and they're meeting you through a series of questions that you want to ask them based on the priorities that the public has stated that they want. We've heard about arts and culture, we've heard about technology and jobs, we've heard about film, and tonight we are going to focus on housing. And we know housing and housing affordability is a very important element, a piece of the puzzle in all of Santa Fe. And the opportunity to produce new housing that is affordable to people who live in Santa Fe there's a great opportunity to do that here. So when we selected Team Midtown, we looked at the composition of their housing developers. We were so glad to see that there are local and regional housing developers on their team. You'll recognize them tonight as they proceed with their presentation. And so they know the ins and outs of developing in Midtown, the needs and desires of communities in Santa Fe. And so we're excited about informing them more about what you would like to see as the public. And we're doing that tonight through questions. You can submit your questions by just being on this YouTube interface, and you can submit that live, and there are people waiting for your questions and they're documenting them, and we'll present them to the developers and development team as we move forward this evening. But first, we want to start out with a presentation by the development team about their big ideas around housing and housing affordability. So James, I'm going to turn it over to you. And again, this is Team Midtown. The leaders of the team are both Sienda Partners and KDC. And James represents that entity, and he'll move it forward from here. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Daniel. So I'm James Field. I'm a principal with Sienda Partners. Just to give you a quick insight into my background, I spent about 29 and a half years at Bank of America. The last 12 of those were president of Bank of America Community Development Corporation. During my tenure at the bank, I got exposure to virtually all parts of the capital stack in affordable housing. We were a developer, an investor, a lender, operator owner, and so I've been exposed to quite a bit of the affordable housing business in my tenure at the bank. What we want to do, and my partner Bill Guthrie from KDC would introduce himself, only he tells me, sent me a text that he's having technology trouble and he's not able to get into the YouTube stream. So hopefully he and Joe can get that worked out and he can chime in here in a minute. But I wanted to just kind of give you an overview of what we want to do tonight. So we want to give you, I'll give you a little background on where we are in the process and what we're hoping to accomplish tonight. We'd like to get our housing partners to introduce themselves and give you a little background on their firm. And then we're going to go through the kind of refresh everybody's memory on the task force that the mayor convened, came up with a really great set of recommendations for addressing housing affordability in Santa Fe. We'll talk a little bit about some best practices that we see around the country and in some cases maybe around the world to help create a spectrum of affordability and to make communities accessible to people. And then we'll take some questions. So to start out with, Team Midtown has been working on the site for a little over 45 days. During that time, we've done a lot of work to understand the physical characteristics of the site and just get our arms around what's going on. And I would describe Midtown as a fascinating puzzle. It's got more layers, it's got more complexity, it's got more both potential and I'd call it potential and complexity that you need to unwind to really unlock its potential in any site I've ever worked on. We have existing buildings out at the site that we know we want to keep with users that would be great community enrichment users that could, kind of help create a sense of community and make it a welcoming place for people. We've got infrastructure that's over 60 years old, and we need to work hard to make sure we understand the physical limitations of replacing that at some point with something that's much more modern and much more efficient and much more sustainable. And so we're nearing the point where we think we understand the physical needs of the property, and we're gaining an understanding of what we've got to do to keep the buildings, make the buildings an important asset in the community. And so we're just now starting to refine our planning around the site. We put some big ideas together, as Daniel said, but we'll start refining those and sharing those with the community over the summer, we hope. But one of the things that really captured my attention, again, when I looked at the site and looked at the opportunity, was there seemed to be a real consensus in the community around the need for a spectrum of affordable housing, especially like the fact that the community had really focused in on the fact that 53% of the people that work in Santa Fe can't afford to live there and have to live somewhere else. So that told me we probably need a lot of different types of housing on the site to do our part to address some of that need. We also, we're really encouraged by the fact that people seem to want this continuum where we might be able to house people at the greatest need and all throughout the spectrum, and that, there didn't appear to be one particular group that dominated the conversation. My experience tells me that mixed income communities are much healthier than communities that are all one or the other. And so tonight we're going to talk to you more about how we, what the big levers are that we think we could pull over time to help create that spectrum of housing. And, hopefully you'll see how we approach it, how we think about it, what principles underlie the foundation of our planning going forward. And we're really looking forward to taking your questions and trying to have a dialogue with you about those principles and how we might build that spectrum of housing. So I think it's time. One thing again I want to put up here. Thanks for the prompt. We look at housing. I spent some time with a fellow, a guy named Jim Rouse. Jim started Enterprise Community Partners back when it was the Enterprise Foundation, and he was, to us, he's one of the icons in the affordable housing business. And he made a comment to me one day that said I thought it was kind of funny. He said, I don't really understand the term affordable housing. He said, all of it's affordable to somebody or we wouldn't build it. And it really made me scratch my head a little bit and think, if you say affordable housing, it means a lot of different things to a lot of people. But, one of the things we're focused on right now is, there's the traditional affordable housing that you normally would see out in the community. Most of it's driven by a subsidy source. And, hopefully you'll hear a little bit more tonight about the fact that we think even in that very traditional affordable space, a mix of incomes is good. It's good for the community, and it's good for the developer, and it's good for everybody, good for the residents. There's this other end of the spectrum, which is market rate housing, which, we'd build a property that, you sell to the people that can afford it. And what we're starting to see around the country more and more is that there are people that earn a little too much money to find their way into a traditional subsidized affordable rental unit or an affordable unit that they might be able to buy, but they don't earn quite enough to buy the property or to rent the property that's just out there at the market rate. A lot of people are calling that the missing middle. And so some of the strategies we'll talk to you about tonight are our initial thoughts on how we might use this mix of housing to do our part to get at that missing middle a little bit. So stay tuned. We'll talk to you more about that. But I think now it's time for our partners to introduce themselves. So, Mike, you're on mute. There we go.
Okay. I'm Mike Lofton with HomeWise. So, we've been very interested in Midtown from the get-go, and advocated a lot that a priority should be housing, and affordable housing is part of it. And I think I really appreciate the fact that the city has made this a big priority. So what we're interested in is doing a different kind of housing in Midtown than we've typically done in other places, although we've done a little in some places where it's like where we think it's higher density, a good mix of affordability and market rate housing, and range is all in between. That if possible, you try to do mixed use buildings too. So maybe the first floor might include retail or other kind of day use where people are coming and going. So you create a vibrant street. It could be a facility like a school, or it could be a library facility. It could be daycare, so that your people can conduct their lives without having to get in the car every day. There's things to do and it's walkable. The other thing that we think is really important on this is that while we're focused on developing Midtown and creating housing opportunities there, that we also pay attention to the surrounding neighborhoods, and that we're sensitive to what's going on there. So that, because this Midtown effectively could affect those other neighborhoods, and probably will. So we're very committed to helping surrounding communities like Hopewell Man increase its home ownership rate, which is very low right now, 40-something%, to help existing homeowners there, especially lower income homeowners, be able to afford repairs on their homes if they need that. So that we look at Midtown as not some isolated thing, but it's connected to the rest of the city. So even though there's the surrounding neighborhoods, I think we also need to be relevant to other neighborhoods in Santa Fe. So for instance, Cerrillos is probably the best bus line in the city. We should have a transit stop there that allows people to connect, both residents of Midtown so they can get to downtown to jobs without maybe getting into a car. Kids living in Midtown, if they're going to Capitol High, they could get a bus down there without having to have a car. So we're just, one way to put this is we're not just talking about housing here. We're really trying to build a community in a neighborhood that is beneficial to everybody in Santa Fe.
Thanks, Mike. So who's up next? Yes.
Yeah. Hi, how are you? I'm very excited to be here, part of this team. I'm Chris Baca. I'm the founder and president of Yes Housing, Inc. We're a New Mexico company. We have been from the get-go. We really got into housing as a result of my work. I have 40 some years of working with children, youth, and families at one of the larger nonprofits in the state, YDI. I spent 41 years there. Along my midpoint there, around 20 years into my work at YDI, we found the common theme that a lot of our families were in substandard housing and really at-risk communities. And it was kind of hard from our point of view to do all the things we wanted to do and could do with children and their families, and yet send them back into communities that were not healthy. And so we forayed into this in 1990. And for a while there, I was juggling two organizations, and it was one of the crazier things I've done in my life, and I've done lots of crazy stuff. But we got into it from the perspective that we needed to address issues from the ground up, literally from the ground up. And we started out in places where nobody really wanted to go because that's the only opportunities we had. Plus, that's where our families were coming from. So we started out in what is now the International District. Then it was called the War Zone, um, and really stepped right into it, right into where most of the problems were coming from. And we found out right away you can't make a community whole if you're isolating it from the rest of the community. And we quickly changed our thoughts around this. They said we have to do our own thing, and in order to build a healthier community, you can't just make it one type. You have to bring the whole mix to the table so that, like anything else, the more you can cover in terms of needs, the better off a community is. You can't just be focused on one piece of it. And we really tested it all the way from all parts of the state, all the way from the southernmost part in Las Cruces, all the way to Farmington. We're in Clovis, we're in Gallup, we're in Los Alamos, we're in little communities like Belen and Deming, and so we really looked at it from a very holistic way, and we looked at it from rural and urban. And what you see here is an urban infill project, the Imperial Building, which was a brownfield actually, and we cleaned it up. We had to clean out the brownfield first, and what we had was a big pit. And when we looked at that big pit, we said, well, we do need parking, and filling it with dirt, you might as well fill it with concrete. So it has underground parking, it has an underground cistern, it has a rooftop garden. We really were aiming to make it more complete for the residents there, not only for the residents at Imperial, but for the community as a whole, because downtown Albuquerque is a food desert. So one of the big goals was to have a grocery store, and we have a grocery store there. We have 2 or 3 restaurants, a hair salon, a pharmacy, etc. It's right near a transportation center. So we really started to look at things like, okay, we can't just make it mixed housing. We got to make it mixed use, because everybody needs services of one kind or another. And it's not just the residents of the places that we're building, it's everybody, it's the whole community. The grocery store isn't just for the residents, it's for everybody that lives in the downtown area. And we've gone and really think in this 30-year period really have evolved from very kind of a narrow view of things, how housing should look, to how a community should look. And we're designing communities with a lot of input from the neighborhoods, the folks that are already living there, and asking them, what would you like to see? We're right now probably 3/4 of the way done into building Nuevo Atrisco. Nuevo Atrisco is a project that is in a historic neighborhood. You might not know that Atrisco existed before Albuquerque existed. Atrisco was founded in 1703. Albuquerque was founded in 1706. So we took that charge very seriously, and we really dug deep into the roots of the community and designed um, uh, a living community that is a little bit different than what you're looking at here in the Imperial Building. What we did is we did a mixed use project, which means all the way from 30% AMI to 80%. We put some spaces in there where people could actually put a shop on the ground floor, work out of there. And then rather than just making that all commercial like we did at the Imperial Building, we actually got another 3 acres in our building with a commercial partner, a very vibrant corner in that community, in that space, so that not only serves the residents of what we're building there, but the whole surrounding neighborhoods. And we spent about 6 months just meeting with all the neighborhood leadership. Probably there was 10 of them, and then associations, larger associations of groups of neighborhoods, to get input. And we have with us, and I'm privileged to have her working with us, is Michelle Denblacker, who's our senior vice president for development, who brings in 25 years of experience in helping us really bring all the resources that are necessary to make big things happen. So the way we see ourselves is we're part of a much larger team. We bring a specific skill set. I think being from New Mexico and working in all parts of New Mexico, gives us a lot of insight into what I think may be missing in other places, including Santa Fe, in getting the kind of mix that's required to build a healthy community. And we're excited because it's not just the housing part of it, but all the other aspects of what's being brought with all the other partners in terms of work, environments, and very exciting developments that we feel that the families and the folks that live in the units that we will build, their whole lives will be enriched. Their lives will change, and they will be part of something that's so exciting and so grand. This is probably this is my 47th year of working in nonprofits. So I'm not going to see much beyond the next couple of years. For me to end it and hand it off to the rest of the team in such a great way is really an honor and a privilege to do that. We're looking we're excited about engaging with the community at large to hear what they have to say, because that's what we will end up looking like. As much as we can fulfill the vision and the dreams and the hopes of the folks that make up Midtown, that's what we want our input, our buildings, our mixed use, our mixed commercial to look like, to reflect like the needs and wants of the community. So that's who we are.
Thanks, Chris. Peter. You're muted, Peter.
There, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Aberg with Aberg Property Company, and I'm very pleased to be here. Our company has primarily focuses on market rate housing, long-term rental housing in New Mexico and in Texas. And we've been involved with two projects in Santa Fe. The first property being Rail Yard Flats, which was 58 units, and Capitol Flats, which is 139 units, which is under construction and will be open in early September. And we're very excited about both projects, and extremely excited to be on the Midtown team because the Midtown campus really matches up well for what we try to accomplish on all of our communities, which is a very high dense urban environment. And Rail Yard Flats and Capitol Flats, for those of you that are in Santa Fe, know that those are right in the core of the city, and they're very dense projects. We typically are always looking for what we call a high walkability factor, where residents that live in our communities can walk within less than 5 or 6 minutes to just about every type of use that's available, whether that be retail or commercial. And we also like to be near public transportation, which in these two cases are the Rail Runner train station. We like to build projects that are around 150 plus or minus units or less. We're not typically a large suburban apartment development company that builds 250, 350 type units. So we like to be, again, in very urban environments. We have learned a lot in Santa Fe and other markets that we're in. And the trend is to be sure that even though it's market rate, that the units are affordable to a vast majority of the market, so that in order to accomplish that, we are always tweaking our design of individual units and floor plans. We also know that, especially during this COVID period, has really proven out that working within your unit or within your community, such as Chris Baca was just talking about what he's doing. We're doing the same to be sure that the units are designed where somebody that's working from home is able to do that, or we have co-work, what we call a co-work lounge in our lobby. High-speed internet, fiber optics, and things like that are very important to residents as we move into a new time in our history here. And we also try to provide an atmosphere, or an environment, I should say, where we're creating a community within a community. And by that, I mean, we're designing an environment that encourages the residents of each community to interact with each other. And again, I think Midtown will be a perfect place for that, to expand that experiment and the knowledge that our residents get from other people in the community always leads to a better environment, a more fruitful environment on all different types of levels. So we very much welcome public engagement, and great to meet everybody out there on this Zoom YouTube presentation. So I'll leave it at that, and we'll move on. Thank you.
Thanks. So Carol, we didn't get your slide in. Would you like to introduce yourself briefly and just tell us a little bit about your organization?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Glad to see people are very interested in housing. When you spend most of your adult life in some parts of housing, it just makes me feel good to see what has really been accomplished, and especially here in Santa Fe. So I'm Carol Luna Anderson. I've was the executive director for the LifeLink, which is a behavioral health program that started out looking at housing needs for folks that had a severe mental illness or a behavioral health need. I have stepped down from that position a little over a year and a half ago, and Michael DiBernardi now is the CFO. What we have done is we have expanded into providing supportive housing throughout Santa Fe, both project-based housing subsidies as well as tenant-based. But what I've been focusing on is actually doing a lot of education and training on supportive housing. Supportive housing is a special best practice model in which individuals that have barriers need not only housing, but they also need services that will help them sustain that housing over a long period of time. So that's what I've been doing now for about a year, and have been just delighted in the real focus of not only our community of Santa Fe, but our county as well as our state, who really have stepped up and taking a real serious look at not only do we need to focus on building, which is what the Midtown campus is going to do, the brick and mortar, but also the creativity of the different types of housing. But also what do we need to do to increase subsidy? What do we need to do to increase the supports that individuals and households, families stay together now with barriers so that they can then be quite successful in their housing? And I like to think that with the needs, we want to live and we want to work, we want to play, we want to be close to shopping, we want to share, but what we really want is a sense of community. And I'm hoping that with the work that is being done towards this campus, that we will see that. It's not going to happen in 1 month, but it will happen over a period of time. And the LifeLink is located, we are a neighbor. We are located on Cerrillos Road. So I always laugh. I said, when you talk about the neighbors, well, they are us. And so we are really excited to have an opportunity to provide some input and to listen to others to see, what is it that you would like to see that would make this feel a really good community and something that all of us, not just those within the area, but throughout the whole city and county, that would be proud to say, this is what we've been able to accomplish because we've been able to listen and to put into practice what we think is good practice and good services for those who want to live in that area. thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for joining us. And before we go, Carol and Mike go through the mayor's task force recommendations, I just want to say again, thanks to the housing team here. We are truly blessed to have not only stellar individual housing providers working with us, but a team. But they work as a team. I hope you heard what I did in their presentations. Everybody's ready to actively engage with the community, to listen, to adjust our plans, to make sure that they're in the proper context when they get implemented. We've got everybody willing to put some level of ability in their property, and to work together to make sure that those address the need people as we can. And so, Mike, Carol, I'll turn it over to you to let you go through the mayor's task force recommendations, and then we'll move on to some best practices.
Okay, thanks, James. So yeah, Carol and I co-chaired the mayor's task force that was titled Advancing Affordable Housing in Livable Neighborhoods. A bunch of recommendations came out of that group. A bunch of people met over, like 24 people met over a period of every week at least, sometimes more, over a period of a few months to come up with some recommendations on what the city could do. So one of those recommendations was, a big one of them was make sure that the Midtown campus includes a healthy amount of affordable housing and as well as other housing options. The whole, like as we talked about before, the whole spectrum of affordable housing. We could switch to the next slide. So this is the spectrum of affordable housing that we really focused on. And what was really cool about the task force is that we had people from, like Carol, who's worked with homeless folks for a very long time, to groups like HomeWise, who works with home ownership and helping people buy their first homes, to rental folks, to neighborhood group representatives. So it was a really diverse group of people. And what was great is how easy it was for everybody to agree that, like, if we're going to make a dent in our housing problems in Santa Fe and the affordable housing problem, affordable housing issue, we're going to need to address the whole spectrum of housing, right? So from the need for emergency housing for people who are homeless or in danger of being homeless, to supportive housing where people need permanent housing, but where there's support services, to rental housing that is very affordable, market rate rental, home ownership, entry-level home ownership, as well as the move up market for home ownership. So, and the reason this is important is not just some philosophical construct, is like the spectrum or the continuum of housing, it's dynamic, right? People move through it. Almost everybody at one point in their life was a renter, right? And now they may own a home now, but at one point you probably didn't move buying a home right out of your parents' house. So people move through this system. And so what's really good about it, and what we really focused on, is like, gosh, when somebody buys a home, if they're moving out of an affordable rental home, that rental unit became available to somebody else who needs it. And guess what? You didn't have to build a new unit. It's like you made a unit that was available as somebody moved up, had upward mobility within the housing spectrum. So we want to pay attention to that. And sometimes, people own a home and like they can't take care of it. What they need is some kind of supportive housing thing, because they need some, assisted living arrangement. So we need to be clear that people move through this. And if the whole system is healthy, everybody's needs are better met. So we need to look at it holistically. So that's what, it was a really good conversation, because oftentimes you get into what I call like the needs Olympics, of like who's more needy than others. And it's like, well, everybody has their own needs. If you walk in their shoes, you would understand. I remember one meeting we had where we were talking about home ownership stuff, and Carol goes, "Let me tell you why I think it's so important." And Carol, who ran LifeLink, she goes, "Look, we need opportunities for people to buy a home because we can't attract employees, social workers who don't get paid a lot of money. It's hard to keep them if they can't afford to live here and eventually own their own home." So it's, everyone contributes to the well-being of the whole community. So we need to make sure there's room for everyone. So next slide. So the, so, you know, we've talked a lot about this, but I think that and the mobility, the importance of mobility, and having this healthy spectrum. What these images show is like different people want to live in different situations, and sometimes it's like the Imperial building is the one on the upper right, I believe. Well, no, maybe that's not it, but it looks kind of like that Chris had showed earlier. But I gotta tell you, man, what a great building to have in downtown Albuquerque. Our office in Albuquerque is not far from there. That neighborhood really needed a grocery store. And so now you got affordable housing and market rate housing and a grocery store. It contributes to the well-being of everyone. So that's, again, so I think that what we're doing in Midtown is saying there's a spectrum of housing that we need to pay attention to. There's also a spectrum of other uses that needs to happen, like things like grocery stores, like workplaces, like restaurants, like schools. For it to be a really vibrant community, we need to pay attention to all those needs. So next slide. And this goes to that very point of what, you know, what kind, like what are the building types that are important to any community, and what this is, what is actually is called the missing middle of kinds of housing types, where, you know, on the left side of this you see like single family detached and semi-detached and duplexes, and you know this housing exists largely. Santa Fe on the upper right side of high-rise apartments, we don't have that kind of housing, but other cities do. What's missing in many American cities is these kind of middle range kind of housing types, like the row housing and higher density townhouses and a courtyard building you see there. So it's just like, we don't know what of these things, what we're going to be able to get done in Midtown, but what we're just saying, we should look at the whole spectrum of housing types that, and make sure, because different people need different things at different points in their lives. So HomeWise has been experimenting with building like way smaller units, right? Like we have a 524 square foot single family home. We have a 700 square foot condo. These have been really popular because not everybody wants 3 bedrooms and all that space. Some people want to live more simply, and you see how family types are different. Like there's way more single people and couples, and people have less children. On the other hand, you also have people with children, and they need the single family house with the yard. So we want to just make sure we're addressing different housing needs, especially some of those needs that we're not doing a good enough job as a community serving right now. Next slide. So these were some of the recommended strategies that came out of the mayor's task force. And some of this, like the second bullet point here, was solely around Midtown and what we should be doing. Related to that is what we're learning in Midtown, because we think we can do mixed use and mixed income and higher density, that we should also allow that kind of mixed use in other neighborhoods too. That I think and figure out how to do more of that. I think Midtown, what could be really important about Midtown is it could provide some examples of other things we do in other areas as a community. You know, and part of this is like, if you look at the last bullet point, is like, it's actually fairly difficult to do live work and kind of mixed use stuff on the current zoning codes. We're thinking Midtown, because of the link overlay district, that should be easier to do. It's more flexible. But this is stuff that we can learn from as we do stuff in Midtown. But yeah, maybe we could broaden, you know, make it easier to do those kinds of projects in other parts of the city as well. So we're hoping that Midtown becomes an example of new things we can do and paves the way into other parts of the city as well. I think that's it.
That one of the things that I really want to focus on also is the fact that not only the building, but the diversity of the different types of building. And I think that it's very important. I have a very strong value structure that we don't isolate folks, and which means then that when we talk about the spectrum, we're actually talking about integration, that we don't take a particular group that has a certain barrier and we put them over on the left side the campus, or we take another group and we move them into another place. That doesn't work. Integration, everyone is different, everyone needs to be a part, and it's very important that we do that, I believe. The other is that I think that one of the focuses will be is that you meet the specific needs of the population who's going to be living there. So as we've said, not everyone wants a 3-bedroom or a 2-bedroom. A lot of the population are very happy now with smaller dwellings. Others want to be able to have an outdoor environment. Some don't, but we give them a choice so that we don't say, here, we're going to build this and you're going to like it and you're going to love it. We don't want it done that way. What we're going to say is that, tell us what it is that you would like. What is it that would make it, comfortable for you? How would you feel within the neighborhood? How would you like the dwelling that you're going to live in that is going to be who you identify with? And give some choices, but let the choices come from those who are going to be living there. I think that's very important. We have a supportive environment, as Mike was saying earlier, and as Chris also talked about, the fact that, we never know in what aspect of our lives we're going to need something. What we wanted when we were 24 is totally different when we're 42 or when we're 62. And so even though that spectrum goes up and down, what we're finding is that folks want to, they want to live in place, but they don't necessarily want to live in place in a house that is much bigger than what they would like. So I think it's very important that when we talk about that integration and we talk about all the different opportunities, that middle group there, that we're going to have a really great opportunity to have some creativity and some innovation in the different types of housing programs that we have right now. And I think it's exciting, but we want to make sure that everyone is going to feel that this is theirs, this is where they are. And I happen to think that it's great because we have corridors, the biggest roads in town, St. Michael's, Cerrillos, and you can see when the arts and design were there, we could see college students, we see elementary school students walking, we see people going to the grocery store, there's a great library, there's banks. So you're going to have something that's already in place that you can build with, and a great number of apartments that have been in place for a long time. And those folks are very much part of the community that will be part of this campus as well.
Okay, David, I think you were going to take us through
Yes.
some best practices and trends, and hopefully people will start to see that what our team's been thinking is in fact in other parts of the country. And so David Dixon with Stantec, take us away.
Thank you. So I'm honored and pleased to be able to join a group of folks in such a great community as Santa Fe. I have to say, I'm afraid what I'm going to say is going to be very boring because you've just heard it from James and Carol and Chris and Michael and Peter. My colleagues have been talking best practices for the last, I don't know how many minutes we've been on. So I'm going to try maybe even dissect a little bit what they've said and repeat it back as if we're speaking to an outline to sort of call out the key points. So one thing, James began with a short background, and his colleagues have followed. I will simply say that I started life as an architect and became an urban designer because I was much more interested, I realized, in creating the foundation that allowed good and inclusive and socially positive design to take place. It's wonderful to design a magnificent building. If it doesn't serve a community because that community is not sufficiently well understood, I'm not sure much was accomplished. So I wanted to get back to foundational issues. And as I've listened to my colleagues here, one word they have all used repeatedly, it's probably been the most used and appropriately the most used word tonight is community. Because when we talk about mixed income and mixed income communities, it's not the housing, of course, matters, but it is creating a viable, sustainable, interactive community, a place to come back to something Carol just said, that everyone from people, including a span of people from very different backgrounds, calls mine, that really spells success. I've had the privilege in my life of planning probably, I was trying to add them up quickly and couldn't, but probably more than 50,000 units of mixed income housing over the last maybe 20 years. I quickly came to realize that the housing mattered and the design of the housing mattered, but what really mattered were taking a couple of really important steps to create a community. And it starts with, and I think you've heard this from all of my colleagues, understanding that diversity means just that. There is no to try and stereotype or silo people who need affordable housing is as ridiculous as trying to silo any of the rest of us. They come with an extraordinary range of not just needs, but also aspirations, cultural backgrounds, preferences, family relationships, all kinds of things that affect where they not only want to live, but need to live. And I think it's one of the things we're all learning right now across our country is don't try and think for other people, let them tell you what they need and want. And the ability to have such a terrifically diverse group of developers who really have been working with these diverse communities as a start, I think is just a tremendous advantage. I want to start the sort of more analytical piece here by coming back to something James started with, which is the missing middle. The missing middle is by no means a myth, and it's in relative terms missing more and more, and I'll make sense out of that. If you look forward to the next 20 years, and this trend is extended back about 10 years, more than 80+% of net new households, and that's America's housing market and it's Santa Fe's housing market, are going to be couples, singles and couples, households without kids. They have housing preferences that look just like what Michael described as the missing middle. The challenge that we all have is that while they are going to represent, I'll even be conservative, more than 2/3 of the housing market going forward, in most cities, only about 1/3 or less of the housing stock is what they're looking for. And boy, are they pushing the prices up for that housing stock. Walkable, the kinds of variety of units that Michael talked about and the Mayor's Task Force has addressed in cool communities like Santa Fe. Their preferences and the fact that they represent, and this is my grandson in the background, sorry about that, and will for 20 solid years, the next 2 decades, this is our new norm, represent the determinant factor in our housing market, means that the need to really build for this missing middle will be increasingly important. And that's one thing that's so exciting about this project, because communities that don't build for this missing middle are going to basically gentrify an awful lot of folks out of their neighborhoods as households without kids look for more urban housing options. But so what does it mean to create a mixed income community? I'll finish with housing because maybe that's the simple part. I think it takes lots of things, but I'll highlight 3. And they really are wonderfully provided for in Midtown and by this team and by the work the city has done, I think. The first is a public realm, creating a place that doesn't just welcome or accommodate a variety of people, it actively invites them. And I'm going to come back to this in a minute. Second is the fact that we all have economic lives that play and our ability to succeed in our economic lives play a very major role in our ability to succeed and be part of a community. And the fact that this team and this place includes not just housing and public spaces, but academic institutions that are very much geared towards job training, includes folks like Carol who are looking at the full realm of supportive services that are part of workforce readiness. If you're a single mom alone or have certain disabilities, you can't just walk into the job market because new jobs appear. Those things will naturally be part of this community. And then finally, we come to housing. But I want to come back to public realm because I think in many ways that's the hardest and maybe the most important, particularly with folks who are so skilled at providing the housing and services already. And there are a couple of things that really matter. One is to recognize that, and these photos that you can see up on the screen sort of represent this, that you need to create a place that understands that the people from many different cultures and backgrounds and economic lives, et cetera, prefer different things or are attracted to different things. You want a place where folks can skateboard, where other folks can sit by a stream or a fountain, where folks can gather for large festivals or for quiet conversations, where kids who are 5 can play and kids who are my age, which is a little past 70, can, I guess, play too. You want beer and wine. You want things that really speak to, and that means understanding and planning with, not for, but with the full spectrum of users, of folks who are going to be this community. It's also about telling their stories. One of I think the real strides that technology or advantages has provided for us is the ability to use public art, not just as something that goes up on a wall as a mural, those can be wonderful, or a statue or something that's fixed, but with digital public art, we can tell the stories, the myriad stories, almost the individual stories of the full spectrum of folks who are going to make up the Midtown community. And boy, when people see their stories told, and when they understand everybody else's stories, it gets much easier to call a place mine. It's really important to have activities that promote interaction among people who don't normally find themselves in conversation. And to me, the easiest and simplest and most fun is a great splash fountain, because kids don't notice their racial or ethnic or cultural differences. They just play, and then their parents start talking to each other. But we need to extend those kinds of invitations to interact across this public realm. Last thing I want to say is clearly, and this will, I think, happen quite naturally here, this needs to be a place where the whole community can come together to celebrate. I think one real mark of success of Midtown, and this has been true of some places I've had a chance to help plan for, particularly Railroad Park in Birmingham, it can be a place where maybe every neighborhood in Santa Fe says, here's where we want to have our community potluck dinner, a place that really speaks to the whole community. It is a place where different people can be personal in the ways that they want to be personal. And if you look across these 3 photographs, you'll see very different kinds of people interacting in sort of quiet and reflective and personally interactive ways that are very different, and yet all accommodated by the same public realm. And if we go to the next slide, I'll finally come to housing. I've heard Albuquerque mentioned a number of times. One of my real interests professionally has been how to use density in positive ways. And the first time I was ever invited by a community to come and talk about density was Albuquerque. And afterwards, there was a woman who was an activist who had been fighting density in her neighborhood. She and I were invited onto a local television interview program, and he expected us to have an argument. And she turned and said to me, you know, if I'd known that density and diversity could be so beautiful, I wouldn't have fought it all these years. And the message here is, and you've seen it in the slides that were shown, affordable and mixed income housing is often the best design, actually, because in many ways, it's often the housing into which the most thought is put. When we look for measures of density, the one that and this will maybe tie all these points together, look to first is, what kind of density does it take to really enliven a public realm, to support cafes and restaurants and things that appeal to a variety of people with a variety of incomes on the ground floor? You've heard my colleagues talk about. And there are some really rough rules of thumb. You can get 1,000 units of housing. That's exactly the kinds of densities that my colleagues have shown you that they build within a 5-minute walk. You can bring a block of Main Street to life. You build 500 units, much harder. If you take 1,000 units and spread them out over a much larger distance, same problem. You don't really get the reward in terms of life on the street. But I think this development and the way the city has conceived it and the way my partners create development is set up to build the kinds of well-designed I like to call it walkable density that can really unlock the sort of community that they've all talked about. And I hope I help people understand a little better, and look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, David. I guess with that, it's time to open it up for. So Daniel, I guess are you gonna
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
fire
so
away.
Moderate. But thank you all for putting that presentation together. It was really informative. It at least provided some perspective and insight to the way that you're doing your early thinking, and allows for a lot of input to create a development plan, because I know that that's where you're heading over the course of the next year. So thanks again for, I know it's early thinking and I appreciate it. Best practices are always fun to look at and how they might be applied to a local place. And a local site. So thanks again for all the experiences and ideas and thoughts you guys are putting into this at this early point. I do want to make just sort of a couple of comments. The mayor's administration is very committed to affordable housing and increasing the production of affordable housing there at Midtown particularly, and as well as the impacts or the potential impacts that new development can have on adjacent neighborhoods, surrounding neighborhoods. And you guys touched on that a bit. I think in the questions, we're gonna wanna ask a few more questions about that. But just as part of this notion of affordability and building on what you guys talked about over the past 2 or 3 sessions, I understood tonight, there's a consistency. It's about building a density that promotes walkability, opportunities for small businesses to thrive. If you don't have the density, the small businesses don't thrive. And so those are 2 things that I think we heard last week, because the density also allows for the innovation hub that you talked about, where jobs and living and play and studying and working all are synergies in a dense place. And that's a vision for Midtown. And that's a common theme that you've been talking about. The other one is proximity. So we're not talking about housing at the edge of town. We're not talking about housing across the street. We're talking about the integration of housing on the site. And so we heard a lot about that from all of you, really, because this notion of the way that you create community is that you create diverse housing types to meet a broad spectrum of needs, and it creates the choices, which I also heard Carol talk about, which was really wonderful to sort of understand this notion that choice is about building the spectrum so people have choices, but it's just not choice, but it's actually creating the opportunity for an inclusive community. And so that was inspiring and exciting to hear in your early thinking, and the commitments and the values I think that you all share as a team that I think resonates with the vision for the future of Midtown. So thank you. On the call or on the meeting tonight is Alexandra Ladd, who is the director of the Mayor's Office of Housing. And I wanted to give her just a minute or 2, if you wouldn't mind taking it, to talk a little bit about your office and your vision and perspective and goals and objectives, and how you are going to be interfacing with the development team to make sure that you're directing the development plan toward achieving public goals and the city's goals. Alexandra, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks, Daniel. Well, that's quite a lot to talk about. How much time do we have? So I think what's so exciting about listening to the presentations tonight is that people are talking about housing in the way that the city has been trying to shift the conversation for the last several years, away from this idea that subsidy means substandard, affordable means crappy, poor people, their needs aren't as important as the workforce. And so this idea that there's a vision of affordability for everybody, that everybody's needs are different, that everybody needs to have choices along that housing spectrum, that people's choices and people's needs change over time. So really bringing this kind of dynamic approach to this property is, frankly, it's what this property deserves, because it's a really great space. It's also what the surrounding neighbors deserve, because this idea that you're building community, I think that word was used a whole bunch tonight, but it's also opportunity, and you're providing opportunities that aren't there now for the people not only living on the campus, but all the people living around the campus. So I think all of that's super important. I think at the city, we look at affordable housing in a lot of different ways in terms of how we can support it. We have a regulation that requires developers, market rate developers, to provide affordably priced units within their projects. That's sort of the stick. And then we provide carrots. We have incentives where we waive fees and we allow density bonuses, and we provides water for affordable units, because the idea is that we want to offset that regulation. But I think more than that, we're really shifting into looking at, well, how do we incentivize the market itself to provide that market-based product that meets a wider diversity of needs? Because up to this point, we have really seen most new development in Santa Fe has maximized value. The idea is that you have to try to sell your housing for as much as you possibly can, because you're going to have to make up for land use regulation, processing delays, expensive land, expensive labor, limited materials, all of these things that make developing in Santa Fe challenging and a little bit different than other places in the state. So we're looking at, well, okay, and this is really the Link Overlay District, which the campus is located in, really started this kind of thinking, which is, how do we achieve public objectives through private market development? So it's good for everybody, right? The developers are making the profit they need to make, but we're also providing a benefit for the community. And that goes beyond the housing, right? And so this idea that we can be more flexible with our rules, that we can reward the kinds of development that we want to see for our community. And I think all of the concepts that were presented here tonight are really, really going to feed into that. And I would also just end by saying that the city looks at, rather than subsidy, we're kind of looking at it as investment. So we know that if we provide financing, some gap financing for an affordable, for say a low income housing tax credit project, a subsidized rental project, we're leveraging a huge amount of investment. It's about $1 for every dollar the city provides, about $10 comes in. And likewise on the home ownership front, and Mike can talk much more about this than I can, but for every dollar of down payment assistance that comes through the city and goes to one of Mike's customers at HomeWise, there's anywhere from $12 to $19 leveraged. So I think it's just super important to talk about it in those terms, because affordable housing by design should be affordable to live in to the people living there, but it's not affordable to build, and it's not substandard. And we're actually raising the bar, and the campus provides just such an amazing opportunity to do that within this whole context and kind of holistic approach to it.
So Daniel, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Alexander. That was great. It was good to hear the perspective, because this is a relationship, a partnership between the private developer and the public entity. And these processes are important in the way that we organize ourselves to be able to make sure that we're getting the right input to the developer to incorporate the public interest into private development. So let's talk, let's go to some of the questions that we've been asked previously, and hopefully there'll be more coming in this evening. So I want to start out by saying again, this is part of the introduction and the due diligence, meaning they're exploring right now, hearing from the public, listening to questions and trying to understand goals. They do not have a concrete development plan that we're all expecting to approve or respond to. So some of these questions, these early questions, seem to be under the assumption that we have a plan in place, but I'll ask them anyway because it may allow you to talk about other stuff. What percentage of low to moderate income housing have you set aside in this project?
So Daniel, I'll take a stab at that. We haven't gotten there yet. What we've done is we've assembled a team that's committed to have affordability targets within their properties and to work together to figure out what those targets need to be. And so, our vision is to actually come up with a plan for the district that's a little bit more comprehensive than a single property would be. And that's going to take a fair amount of conversation. You know, we got to start out with how many units can we build? Where are we going to put them? What's it going to cost to get the dirt ready to build a building on it? We've got to march through a lot of steps in the process. I think that, you know, a lot of times you assemble a team and they're all going to what Alexander talked about. I want to build the most expensive house I can sell because I'll make more money. But we don't have a team like that. We've got a team that's committed to building this healthy housing spectrum. And so I think as we start to take on our community engagement activities, that's going to be one of the topics is, you know, what do those targets need to be? What do we need to hit at Midtown to be all the things we've said we want to be to the surrounding community? Mike or Mikey or anybody got anything they'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say is that, I mean, I really like the affordable housing team that we put together here, because we're all very committed to integrating affordable housing into and market rate housing. So, you know, at HomeWise, I mean, and James is exactly right. It's like, until we understand the costs and stuff, and you know, it's hard to know exactly what percentage of affordable housing we're going to be able to achieve. But one of the things that we do is wanting to make sure that there's housing in in tiers, right? There's a range of affordable housing. So we'll try to have affordable housing, and this is, and HomeWise is very focused on home ownership opportunities, but you know, it could be condos in this case. But that people who are, you know, making $25,000 a year working the cafeteria at the hospital could afford a home. And we've helped people that work in the cafeteria at Christus St. Vincent's, and that's very important to us. Those are not high wage jobs, but you know, if they were living in any other part of New Mexico, pretty much they could buy a home. In Santa Fe, it's so expensive, it's hard for them. But then what's that next tier, which like a school teacher or a nurse or a police officer, or, you know, what, you know, that's another tier. And then, you know, maybe it's a cop and a teacher live together. That's you know, they have a double income. That's a different tier, on up to market, what the market rate housing is. And so that we have a whole range is one principle. The other is that in home ownership, the city, the inclusionary zoning ordinance Santa Fe Homes Program mandates about 20% of that housing be affordable. And also does the tiered system. We always try to exceed that. And I can't guarantee that we're going to be able to exceed it or by how much at this point in time. We just need to know more. But that's definitely our intention, is that we would like to do more than that. And then I think that's also, you know, in the rental housing, which I'll let other people talk about that, but it's, you know, most of the time in the rental housing in Santa Fe with the Santa Fe Homes Program, there is a provision there that you can do a fee in lieu of the housing. The city has done more incentives and has tightened up on some of that. I think that I know Alex Ladd worked on a lot, but I do know that, so a lot of times you're not getting the housing on site. And I know, like Peter Aberg has talked about, no, our priority and our intention is to get the housing on site. So how that's all going to work and can that be done for sure? Is it like, there's just too many unknowns, but the fact that this is what people's goals are, is to make sure we have integrated housing there. And I think like with Yes Housing, which, you know, I'm very familiar with their work too, you know, they tend to do more affordable stuff, but they're also committed in that case, because they use federal subsidies and stuff, but to also integrate market rate housing into that housing. So I think, you know, philosophically, the team is really together on the goals that we all talked about of having a range of housing, having it integrated in the buildings, having it integrated with mixed use, so there's not just housing. You know, so I think it's a really good vision. I think that's what we're doing now is, all right, now let's dig into the detail of the site, what the costs are going to be. There's going to be a lot of infrastructure that is going to need to be built there. What can we do? And then the other thing is, what kind of public subsidies can we get? And you can't, you know, it's not like the city has these huge deep pockets and piles of money that they're ready to do subsidy for affordable housing with, but they certainly help, and the city's been great at that. But there's also federal sources and other sources, and I know like Chris and Michelle at Yes have been very effective at tapping into those sources. HomeWise has been one of the only, I think the only group in the whole state to use new market tax credit as subsidy source for ownership housing. We intend, and this is an eligible area for that, so we'd intend to tap into that. So I think, you know, I mean, that's what we're doing now is what's the work to pull all this together to come up with that right spectrum and to try to get as much affordable housing as we can.
James, I would also add the placement of housing, which Carol touched on. I think is going to be really important once we get further down the road. And by that I mean as we work with educational uses and film and entertainment uses and other uses throughout the campus, where we place housing throughout the campus is going to be a very important part of the overall development and getting everybody to interact with each other. And again, we're not at that point yet.
I'd like to say just that I really find this whole process exciting as we've been talking about housing and the parts, what you need in community to support it, whether it's art in public places or activity on the street, mix of views. It's really helped me kind of get a better understanding of how the vision of this community kind of comes together. I went from thinking in terms of blocks and forms, streets and buildings, and now I'm having a much different view where it really has to do with the nuance of how people cross paths and what activities are integrated. So anyway, I just find that really exciting. Wanted to chip in on that.
There's a question here that asks specifically, well, it's, how do you define affordable housing? How do you define it?
Do any of our housing partners want to start that off? I think we lost James momentarily, so I'll fill in for him for a minute. Does anyone want to start? Mike, maybe?
I mean, I think that this question comes up, my whole career working in housing and affordable housing. There's not one definition of affordable housing. It depends on where you're at in life, right? What is affordable to a single person who has been homeless and without without much of an income, probably no income, is that number is probably zero, and you're going to have to figure out a way to provide housing for them. For everybody wants to use this like standards like 30% of your income and stuff. It's like, well, 30% of the income of a single mom with 3 kids may be too much, right? A single person can pay maybe more of the percentage of their income because they're not supporting children as well. Oftentimes in home ownership, which I'm very familiar with, many of us, myself included, and my family, we spent higher percentage of our income on in order to buy a home, and because we wanted to stretch to be able to buy a home. And guess what? Over time, because I'm in a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, my monthly payment's not going up with the exception of any increases in taxes and insurance. So my housing expense is really stable. And as I get pay increases, guess what? The percentage of my income going to housing goes down. So there's complexity to this. And I think that's why we emphasize, and everyone's talked about why we have to have the full spectrum of housing options out there and provide that, because different people need different things at different stages of their lives. And it needs to be affordable to them in their particular circumstances. So I would love the clarity and simplicity of saying, here's the number. Given how complicated and the different needs of people are, you're just not going to get that. It's like we got to address that whole spectrum. So we're serving everybody.
And Michael, if I could just add on to that, just one touch. This campus is not an island. It's not, sort of walled and in and of itself. It connects into broader neighborhoods. So it's really understanding, the housing, accessibility within those neighborhoods and how this can complement and add to that as well.
As one more note, we're talking about affordability and tying it directly to housing, but it costs probably more than $11,000 a year for the typical household to own and operate each car it owns today. And what has been happening over the last decade is folks with lower incomes are being pushed further and further from the center of their communities. And I don't know Santa Fe well enough, but I wouldn't be surprised. But that means further and further from transit, whether it's buses or anything that provide a much less expensive way to get to work, to get to school, to visit friends. So providing affordable housing in the center of this community or in Midtown is helping in two ways. If you can if a household needs two cars and can go to one car, that's like adding $1,000 a month to their income these days.
And one of the things that we look at as well is that when we talk about affordable, we're talking about where the individual, where the household is. So that, you know, it's nice if we could have a percentage, something to go on, but actually taking a look at the whole that the income that they have, and what is it that will give you peace of mind that you're not going to have to every third month be concerned that you can't pay the utilities, be concerned that you can't pay, you know, affordable rent is just as important as affordable mortgage. So really taking a look at that and build in the idea that this is where you are now, but where do you want to be in 2 years or 3 years? If it's a young couple and they don't have children yet, or a single, but where is it that, what can you do that with what you have that will not create more stress or depression or cause you more concern because you've really put yourself in a place of not being able to pay that monthly, that monthly requirements. So looking at it from that affordability is where the persons are. And that's why it's so important that you look at job opportunities, you look at, you know, education so that you can gain more skills. Then you can move up to, you know, an apartment that is on the lower end of the rental to the next level up, so that it also makes available the one that you just left.
So I want to take a moment to hear from Alexandra, because I know that she manages and monitors affordable housing that have affordability built into the way that they're financed to ensure the public that they remain affordable to that household. Alexandra, can you just give us a brief affordable housing 101? What is affordability? What does housing affordability mean? And can you give an example of a typical household in San Francisco and how they calculate their rent based on the parameters, the regulations that you're given?
Thanks, Daniel. So we always anchor the affordability to a household on the homeownership side through a lien. So if somebody is able to buy a home at a subsidized sales price, and again, back to we have pretty standard definitions. This 30% of one's income, no more than that, should be applied to their housing costs, including utilities. That's sort of a HUD standard. So we do use that, but I think to Mike's point, and that's where all of the amazing housing counselors come in, because they're really working with individuals and the individual situations that folks have, because you can have the exact same income and have a very different need for how much assistance you require. So so that lien prevents somebody from selling a subsidized unit into the open market because it's almost like a right of first refusal. They need to then try to find another income certified buyer. So I think that's an important point to make. We're not just kind of throwing money out there and hoping that somehow we can address the problem. We're using data, and we work a lot with the nonprofits to kind of figure out where needs are, and to really personalize that approach so that it meets a wide array of needs. On the rental side, you know, I think probably the most standard affordable housing tool would be the low income housing tax credit program, which is very competitive. So we can't rely on it much, but the good news is that it is subject to ongoing compliance every year from the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority. So we know that if they aren't compliant with keeping to the rent restrictions and the income limits that they were funded for, that the funding will get clawed back. But I think what's important to note too is because the funding is so competitive, the projects are really, really beautiful. And I think most people driving down the street would have no idea that some of our newer tax credit projects are affordable. One of them, the Stagecoach Apartments, I think is one of my favorites because it's also a historic renovation of an old Route 66 motel. So it's kind of bringing in a bunch of different elements, but the original hotel rooms are reserved for people who are transitioning out of homelessness, and they need, are better served with a different kind of unit than the 3-person family. And that same project also has 3-bedroom townhomes with front yards and backyards and places where families can have dogs and have space outside. So I think, I like that you brought up that question, Daniel, because I think people don't realize how strategic the provision of affordable housing is, and how we are constantly looking at performance benchmarks and making sure that what we're funding, we're trying to move needles. We're not just trying to save one life at a time.
Thanks. I want to get back to these kinds of questions again about percentages and stuff, because I think that it's a process to identify what percentage of affordability will it be in any large scale development like this. But I do want to encourage responses from this question. And so to maybe be more affirmative in your commitments moving forward. But someone asked a sort of cynical question. I've been hearing the word try a lot when it comes to affordable housing. It leads me to question the commitment to affordable housing. So can you affirmatively talk about your affirmative commitments to affordable housing?
Yeah, I would like, so we've helped, HomeWise has helped over 5,000 households buy a home. We're going to try to do even more. We're going to try to do even better than that. I think having aspirations to do better and to try to do it, I can't guarantee it. I don't have a magic wand, but we're going to work really hard to try to make that happen. I can't guarantee it, but we're going to work really hard to try it. So I don't think, Yes Housing has done thousands of units in New Mexico. It's like, I don't know how to prove that commitment other than say we've already been doing a lot of that. We're going to continue to do more and more of it. And we're going to always try to do better. There's nothing wrong with trying as long as it's not it's not BS. This is not BS. We are trying really hard to do a great thing here. And we're going to work really hard. We are committed. I don't think there's anyone that you're seeing here today that's wavering on anything.
Yeah, Mike, and I'd say it this way. If you can tell me what it's going to cost, we'll talk more specifically. Today, we can't tell you what it's going to cost. And, you run the risk of making these big commitments before you know enough about a deal and producing zero. And I would prefer to be more informed before we start talking about actual targets and have a lot more dialogue with the community and do those kind of things. Because, I've seen people commit themselves into zero production, and that's probably not going to help anybody.
I also think it's probably worth mentioning that, the reason that, because I've seen that question come up, and I've seen the question of, why we sometimes seem to say, I don't know, as a team. I think it's really important for the community to remember, and for us to continue to highlight, that a big part of why we are not giving 100% affirmative answers all the time is because we recognize the need to work with the community and to have public engagement and to develop a plan with the greater community as a whole. So that's part of why we're not trying to create affirmative answers on all of these topics, because we recognize there's a need to have part of that be driven by the community and public engagement we're planning on doing. But like Mike said, we're very committed to affordable housing as a recognized, and spectrum of housing as recognized parts of what we want to do on the Midtown.
So I'm going to just push this a little bit more, because I don't think that answers the people's public's question. In the Midtown Planning Guidelines, in the RFEI, and in the selection of the Master Development Team, affordable housing was a priority, and the commitment to actually build it was a priority. Is this team going to build affordable housing in Midtown?
Yes, I don't know how to make this any clearer.
I feel like that's been kind of, yes, of course we are.
That's what we wouldn't even be part of this team if it didn't include affordable housing. When this thing was being talked about, I was in a lot of people's face about this has to have a really strong affordable housing component. It's like, there's zero question about that. This is such an important thing to help advance the cause of affordable housing. Yeah. I really am, I don't understand why there's doubt about that.
That's why I was trying to get you guys to say affirmative things versus, well, we'll try. And that's what I think the cynical question came from. So thank you for.
I'll add just a concluding note. As somebody who's worked with lots of developers around the country, no developer in his right mind would bring 3 or 4 affordable housing mission-driven partners on board if he or she did not intend to develop affordable housing.
Right. That gets to what I wanted to say. Yes, is founded on its mission is to build affordable housing. If we can't build affordable housing, well, we're not in it, right? We're in it because that's what we do. We've been doing it for 30 years. I don't know how much more of a commitment you can get out of a organization of that it to be its founding principle. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Great. That's what I think this public wanted to hear. That's a starting point for you guys. The actual development plan and how many, where, all of that is to be determined in partnership with the city and the public. But starting point is, yes, affordable housing.
Yes.
Here's a question that talks about, I would love to see this plan include accessible housing for people with special needs, especially people with physical disabilities that may need wheelchairs. Will you think about universal design and accessibility in the design of your housing?
We're required to.
Yeah, again, yes. Everything we design, whether it's for families, for seniors, for disabled, we always incorporate universal design principles. So it's at least visitable if you don't need it currently for yourself, but certainly as a resident of the community, you might not need it today and you might break your leg tomorrow. We all need accessible housing. So it's definitely a constant goal.
And Daniel, I'd stretch that out a little bit. You know, part of the work we're doing right now with all the existing buildings is to figure out how to make them more accessible. Part of what we're trying to plan into the rest of the community is how to make it not just accessible, but comfortable for somebody with mobility challenges, or, you know, there's a lot of challenges. You got to be ready to help people avoid the trap, if you will. You know, I look at some buildings and I wonder, you know, how bad would that be if I couldn't get around the way I do today? And so I think we're building that into the housing and everything else we do. And so, yeah, that is another place where we'll make a firm commitment to make sure that we're
public again. Visit the RFEI. There was a section on there on accessibility and universal design, and we'll be using those as a way as we move forward with the design with the developer. Here's an interesting question I think that you guys touched on at the beginning of this presentation. The campus is not a capsule. There are neighborhoods nearby. How is that being considered, especially in relationship to Siringo and Camino Carlos Rey?
So Daniel, is that a question about, is that a question more about kind of the impact of the traffic? How do you read that question? Because I could read that a bunch of different ways. And I think that, you know, our plans for engaging with the community are gonna differ. So for example, we're talking about transportation and connectivity. We'd like to engage with the communities to make sure we're hearing from and working with the communities, so we're not creating a nightmare for the surrounding communities. It feels accessible, feels welcoming. It's you know, it's not just getting traffic in and out, but it's making sure we're not having a negative impact on any of our neighbors. Gentrification, you know, I think Mike's touched on that. We got a number of strategies in mind to help make sure we're not creating a situation that displaces people unnecessarily. You know, so I'm not sure exactly where that one's pointed.
I think I may know, but again, I'm interpreting from the question that was given. But during the past year and a half, we heard a lot from adjacent neighborhoods and the communities there saying, how might the city think about dealing with the unintended consequences of development on our neighborhood? And typically that means with increased land values and housing prices as a result of good development that we want to see in town. How might we think about preserving and stabilizing those neighborhoods and communities?
You know, like I was saying earlier, I think it's important that, like, you know, I know Hopewell Man across St. Mike's has expressed this concern a lot, and working, and Chain Breakers and other organizations have been working really hard to make sure people aren't displaced. And I think we need to support those efforts. And I think one way we can support it is, can we help people who live in those neighborhoods own their own housing, buy their own homes so they don't get evicted if rents go up? Another thing we can do is those homeowners who are lower income, can we help them in a couple ways? One is to have a home improvement fund that could help make home improvements so that somebody doesn't have to sell their home because they can't afford to fix the roof. Another way is, very few people know this, but people who are on disabilities or seniors can petition to put a freeze on their property taxes if they're below a certain income. We should be helping, but people don't know about it. We should be doing outreach and helping people apply for that, so that property taxes doesn't negatively affect them in the future. I think there's, you know, I think we need to explore other ways to help too. I think that can we help protect affordable rental housing that already exists in those neighborhoods? So if values go up, that those units don't become unaffordable. I think another thing that we need to be thinking about is there's going to be jobs and opportunities, school opportunities and those kinds of things, workforce development things. Community college is going to be there. University of New Mexico is going to be there. Is there connectivity to those neighborhoods where the neighborhoods, you know, can take advantage of those things so that people can learn a new job? And there's going to be the film industry there that's going to be very robust. Those are really good jobs. There's apprentices in those jobs. We should be helping people get into those kinds of things. So it's not just the housing part, there's other opportunities. But I think we're committed to making sure there's access to that. I think I would love to see, and I don't know how to do this, but I would love to see better connectivity across St. Mike's, because if you've ever, I've ridden my bike across that street, and it's a little scary, you know, because the traffic comes, it's a lot of traffic and it comes really quickly. So for pedestrians and others, can we create connectivity so people can take advantage of the amenities Midtown's going to have without, you know, worrying about how they're going to get across the traffic? I think, and like I said before, it's not just with Hopewell Man and the other surrounding neighborhoods, Siringo and whatnot, but what about other neighborhoods that are non-adjacent, like, you know, around Airport Road? Is there connectivity there? So are we making sure that bus line is even more robust and has a way to bring people to the campus and beyond to downtown, so that people can take advantage of what the campus has to offer? I think it's really important we see Midtown as being a great place to live and to work and to play and to learn, all the things we talked about, but not just for the people who live there, but for the city as a whole. This should be something that everybody can take advantage of.
So Mike, I'm sorry, I won't direct these questions, whoever wants to answer them. But there was a presentation from Mike and David that showed, and I just want to clarify for this person submitting this question, that there was a diagram that showed a large tower, housing tower, and this person is concerned that, is that really part of the plan?
No, I mean, you can't go above 5 stories in the Lake Overlay District, period.
Right.
No one would propose such a thing. I think some of the images that are shown is just so it helps spur conversation. But you know, and I think, it's the design part of this is going to be very interesting, right? Of like, you know, there was the one rendering that you showed, the elevation that on the HomeWise slide, where we proposed a 4 to 5 story building that could have condos in it, and the first floor would be some kind of facilities or retail and stuff. So we're, you know, whether we're going to build that or not, I don't know. But what we were trying to do is get our arms around, you know, what might something look like. And and one of the things, what we really wanted to show on that is, this is something I've learned from doing some condos in the Siler Road area. If you could go to the HomeWise slide, that would show this. But the
Yeah.
but the idea of this was, could there be, here you are. So what this is trying to show is like a different kind, obviously it's a higher density building than we have built before. But also shows that there's balcony spaces and outdoor living spaces done in a different way. Because one thing we have learned, that people love outdoor space and they use it 9 months of the year in Santa Fe. Well, how do you do that in a higher density thing? So we're thinking of like, we need to do balconies. This was an attempt to show what that might look like. The other thing we're trying to do here is we want this to have a Santa Fe, feel to it, and with the stucco and colors and stuff, but also we're contemporary and something different. And so I'm not sure this is what we're going to do. I'd really be curious, and people who are on the YouTube, of what do you think of this? What would you change? What other kinds of ideas? I think we're in a process of creating a different kind of housing type for Santa Fe. So we're throwing these out as ideas, not as like, they're not, there's not some secret plan. We're just started planning. So and that's what these things are for, is we want input on what do people like, what don't they like? Would people be interested in living in a place? Do you think your kids who, your single professional son would want to live here? They don't have kids. What is the kinds of, who would take advantage of this? So I think what we're doing right now is beginning the discussion of what the master plan should include.
And Mike, I just want to reinforce a point that you made earlier, and the reason I brought up the slide was, let me just get to it here, is, we think it's a wasted opportunity if we ended up doing single family product on this site. We're not going to sort of unlock the full potential that David spoke about in terms of having a robust enough population to support, retail and Main Street and others. And at the same time, we don't certainly believe that anything of the higher density order is something to contemplate on this site. And the reason this is grayed out, this missing middle, is an area of opportunity that we think is going to satisfy the housing demands on the site and give enough diversity of product that we believe would work here. So that's the area that we'd focus on. Now, how that mix is made up is certainly something that we're going to have to put a lot of effort and engagement with the community on. But for now, that's the area that we think is the greatest opportunity.
Yeah, and it's going to look more like Santa Fe. We don't build cookie cutter projects. That in our engagement strategy, we talk a lot about to the neighboring neighborhoods and businesses, so that what we build doesn't, look out of place. It fits in. We incorporate a lot of concepts and designs that are reflective of the culture and history of the community we build in. We don't build one project and build it in every community we go to. So.
Let's talk, thanks. The next question is kind of building on this, a little bit about neighborhood design, creating great neighborhoods that are comfortable and walkable. So this sounds like it's written from a true urbanist. It says trees reduce heat and are healthy for the environment, according to the recent World Economic Forum reports. What are plans to plant trees in the mixed-use neighborhood in the Midtown district?
So it might be worth mentioning that one of the things we've talked about before is having different kinds of parks and open green spaces. And certainly, and I'd love the housing people to speak to this, but we've talked about how maybe you have some rooftop gardens, maybe you have green spaces specifically associated with certain housing buildings, but also just the fact that we're going to have trees and green spaces, spread throughout the entire Midtown district. I don't know if any of the housing guys want to speak to, their specific goals for maybe rooftop gardens or things like that.
Well, yes, we've done almost every project we build has a garden and green space. Even the downtown Albuquerque building has a rooftop garden and it supplements those folks, the food budgets that live there, because we have an 8-month growing season, and it's on the very top. It's one of the more beautiful gardens you'll ever see. I don't think we have a slide there that represents it. The other thing is that, you know, the use of water in a desert state, we're very conscious as to not only building water conscious and energy conscious aware buildings, but we design them right into the space so that both the opportunity to eat healthy and to enjoy the outdoors and to have areas where you can recreate and hang out with your family, and also to impact your food budget. It's all very much a part of how we design. Sometimes it's four floors up, like in downtown Albuquerque, and other times it's built right on site, because we're very much aware of our history as being agrarian. We're very much aware that New Mexico is a desert state, and that water is at a premium. And so at the Imperial Building, we have a $25,000 gallon cistern, and we collect groundwater and we pipe it up to the rooftop garden. We also water all the trees on site with that water. So that's how we design things. We're very conscious of the environment and how we utilize space, and how we utilize not just trees, but greenery that gives sustenance, fruit, vegetables, etc.
So Daniel, the other thing I think we have to add real quick is we really need to spend, every time I walk on the site, I think about the existing plant material that's there. We've seen some photos of different parts of the campus in its heyday, and the landscape was absolutely beautiful. And, we'd really like to start with understanding what's there, what should be cultivated and saved, if you will. Where are we? Because it's been, it needs some love. And so before we start coming up with a plan for planning and, where we'd want to go, we got to start with, what's there and how can we make the most of it and make it, kind of springboard anything that we might do at an individual property or within the community. We might as well do the best we can with what we've got. It has been beautiful, it can be beautiful, and we'd like to do our part to make it beautiful again.
I'm going to ask a question, and then it looks like David wants to talk. So I'm going to prompt it just a little bit. Design matters and affordability matters. So tell me about the neighborhood design in a way that it's a livable place where people want to live and invest in rent or a mortgage. What will make this place special?
Well, because I was going to answer the other question, I'll answer that one and then jump a little bit into this one. Okay. I think I was a very, very late convert to urban agriculture. I'll just, I don't want to lose all my cool creds here at once, but what I have found is really fascinating in mixed income communities is the way urban agriculture can bring very different kinds of folks together to work together and then talk together and then get to know each other. It's almost as effective as a play fountain, bringing different kinds of kids together and getting their parents talking. And if for nothing else, whenever we plan mixed income housing, we find some way to get folks to take care of shared nature and shared food and shared food production. I actually think that I am not committing any of my dear client group here who are diverse and obviously very skilled in what they do, but creating the density that allows us to support active ground floors and bring streets to life, green streets, shaded streets, streets with water, and the kinds of things people talk about are just great. But more than anything else, I think the foundation, the threshold foundation is to create the density, and it's exactly what my good colleagues have shown in terms of the work they do, that gets enough folks out walking around on these streets and using public spaces that they can support the real kind of vitality that promotes interaction. Is I think I think to create a community that people will think is beautiful because their lives there are beautiful.
Thanks,
And
David.
David, if I could just tag team on that, you know, stepping outside of the buildings, I think it is important to have the density to be able to support the population. But, you know, as a landscape architect, my real interest and focus is on the public realm. And we've spent a lot of time and research, you know, in recent years on health and wellness. How can we, you know, promote healthy environments? We've worked a lot around the idea of happiness. How can we build a society and a community that really do sort of become interdependent and sort of enduring. And I think it's even more important today, you know, in this COVID sort of pandemic world, that we are creating an environment that allow people to realize their best, to be their safest. And so we'll be looking at this with a very sharp lens in terms of how do we formulate our streets, our sidewalks, our parks, our plazas, the places where people congregate. How can we make them not just beautiful and attractive and functional, but also safe and healthy? So we've got to sort of crack this nut now.
Thanks. We have about 18 minutes left. I want to begin winding down the questions, but there's a question here, and then we will talk about the upcoming schedule. But the question hopefully will allow the team members to really tell the public about their experience. So the question is, what specific experience does KDC and Sienda Partners have in the development of affordable housing?
Yeah, I've got my speaker working here. So hello, first of all, and so happy to be here and with our team members. And as you're seeing here on our Team Midtown, KDC brings the appropriate partners in any given neighborhood that we develop in. We are not a multifamily or a residential or a single family or condo developer. We don't have that expertise. So it's all about partnership. But in Atlanta, we're in a mixed use environment there with State Farm. Here in Dallas, we've got 2 projects where we've got a sister multifamily developer who's delivering affordable housing. And so it's all about partnering and bringing in those partners who do deliver this to the neighborhood. We're focused on quarterbacking a lot of the financing and the infrastructure and bringing the partners and team members to the equation to all play in the same sandbox. So that's what we do at KDC. And James, you know, has at Sienda, 29, 30 years of experience in this very arena. So Sienda, James.
Yeah, so Daniel, and I am, as president of Bank of America CDC, when I took over, we had a 15,500 unit operating portfolio, operating multifamily units of where we were the owner. During that time, we developed, I'm just doing the math, about 5,000 units, and we had a pipeline of about 1,200 units under construction when I retired. Before that, I managed the tax credit business at Bank of America, invested about $3 billion in low-income housing tax credits. And then in the middle of all of that, I managed a region where we ran about $500 million a year in debt financing for affordable housing properties in the Western United States. And so, as I said early on, I've got some experience in pretty much every part of the capital stack as a lender, an investor, an owner, an operator, and a developer. And so hopefully I've made enough mistakes along the way where I won't have to repeat too many here.
Well, just when you think you have good enough experience, the next project is another learning curve. But bringing all that history from both of you is an important piece. And, there is no project at this scale that does not have partners to support the effort. No one developer can do it all. And it seems like you guys have you did bring the right sort of ingredients and the partners together to address what the vision was that the public has articulated. And so congratulations on getting this far in this process. We know that you guys are spending a lot of time energy, work, resources, and understanding the site and its potential. And like James and Bill have said to me several times, infrastructure will drive a lot of the decision-making as we begin even looking at what a development plan might be. So they're focused on a lot of their energy on that right now, and we're interacting with them daily. So thanks, you guys. I know that oftentimes the questions feel like they're challenging. I think people just want to know, and I think also I forgot too that we went through a tough few months getting to this point and bringing you into this process. But I do hear from so many people how much they respect all of the fortuitousness that you guys have put into this process and dedication, because it takes a lot to get through these processes. So thank you for even getting this far and participating in this public forum. So before we end up, I do want to give a chance for Sage to talk about their work and what the next steps are. But I do want to, and then I'll close out after you finish.
Sure. Well, first I'd want to turn it over to anyone else on the team who didn't, for anyone watching who doesn't know, I'm Sage Morris Green. I'm the project coordinator for our team Midtown Plan. Was there anyone on our team of amazing housing people that wanted to say anything and didn't get a chance to for our plans? No, a lot of head shaking. Okay. James, Bill, did you guys have anything else you wanted to say? Okay. Well, so our plans moving forward, we do have a website. It's teammidtownsantafe.com. We will be posting things there as we have updates to post. We will also, we have an email that you can send to, which is teammidtownsantafe@gmail.com. The city website is still going to be up, and the city email is still going to also be taking questions. We're all working together. So you can, bring those things to anyone you want. But if you want to email us directly, you can use that email. Again, it's teammidtownsantafe@gmail.com. And as Corona restrictions lift, we're going to be looking more into ways that we can engage with the public and start having some of these, sort of comment sessions like Mike talked about, where we start to, really be able to get to ask everyone what you want to see, what you don't want to see. So those are sort of our plans moving forward. We don't have I'm sorry for those of you who don't like the I don't know answers, but I don't know when Corona won't be an issue. So I don't know when exactly we will be able to do those things live with people, but those are our plans moving forward.
Sage, I think the other thing that we'd like to make sure everybody knows is, the city has engaged some community partners, Santa Fe Art Institute, UNM, and Little Globe, who will be running some community engagement focused around gathering in stories from the community and really focused more on storytelling and art. And we're going to work closely with that group to make sure that we get to hear what they're able to gather in. One thing that we like is, the city might be able to gather in a certain amount of input through their channel. The community partners will gather in a different kind of input through their channel. And then we're going to do our own sessions. We'd love to do them and have a little fun and do them, do sessions that are more personal and interactive, but whatever we do, we'll be out there asking you for your input. But mostly we're trying to we'd like to make sure that the three parts and pieces of this program work together. You never know where the good ideas or the good information is going to come from. And so our ears are open. We are very much looking forward to some of those first Santa Fe Art Institute, UNM, and Little Globe activities, because those stories, what I'm very hopeful is that those stories, I think David touched on it, they can help us create something that the community feels like is theirs. They can feel like there's a sense of ownership. If we can tie what we do in the development to what people feel like is important in their community, then they're much more likely to be comfortable and want to come be a part of it. And so that's that's really high on our list, is to make sure we're listening. Let them go have their, let them go do their work, but we want to make sure we've got our ears open and we listen.
Right. So if you want to get in touch with us, please feel free to do that. We have community partners we're working with, like James mentioned. We're still going to be working with the city. But whatever you want to do to reach out to us, that email is great. And we will have our own sort of sponsored series of meetings. This was like the city sponsored developer series. We will have a developer sponsored series of things. And so please just stay tuned for that and know that we're here.
Thank you, guys. So just to clarify and let you know what the city is doing, as James and Sage mentioned, we are finalizing our scope of work with the University of New Mexico Department of Planning, Planning and Design Assistance to Design and Planning Assistance. There you go, DPAC. To be able to work with us and the developer to engage the community effectively. They will be establishing a community advisory board on public engagement, which will help develop the public engagement plan moving forward that the developer and the city will sort of feed into. So we want to make sure that we're coordinated and that we're not hearing disparate ideas, but we're actually trying to funnel them into a central place to make sure that the plans for the site are informed through a public engagement process that is community oriented. And that's why we are working with the UNM DPAC team to create that process for us and work with the community advisory board that they will be developing as part of their scope of work. So that's happening next. Our series is a city-sponsored hosted series of workshops. This is the last one because now we're going to transition into that public engagement process. We will most likely pick up city-sponsored events later in the year when we get further along and after the public engagement work has been done more at that community level. So thank you everybody who has participated in these Meet the Developer series. This is part of the introduction of the development team to the people of Santa Fe as they start and embark and move forward on understanding the site and starting to create development plans within the near future and within that process of the public engagement scope of work. So again, thank you everybody for submitting your questions, listening in and participating. And thank you Team Midtown for being such great partners. So good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Daniel, thank you. You've done
Thank
a
you.
great job with all this.
Bye.